So then week to week, what we're asking you to do, um, is, as I said, is to check all of your plants for the eggs and caterpillars. You'll record that data by the species of milkweed they're found on. I'll show you a data sheet after this. So that can be a reason if you have like one clump of butterfly weed and in the front yard you also have some, or you have the butterfly weed in the front yard and you have the common milkweed in the alley. If you make those separate patches, it might be easier to record the data. um, Monitor it in a way that's comfortable for you at the time of day that's comfortable for you. It doesn't for this project matter. You could monitor at midnight if you wanted to do that in the dark and you could see caterpillars. You can monitor at noon. You can monitor at noon one day and at 6 p.m. The next week. That's not going to matter. We like it if you could have roughly 7 days between your monitoring. But if it's off by a few days, we would rather have data and have it off by a few days than not have data. Um, I like to, especially early in the season like this, if you could mark the little tiny milkweed plants with like takeout spoons, chopsticks, whatever, that can make it easier and faster. You can buy those flags like the utility company uses if you want to use those. There's like specific flagging tape for ecological monitoring, but frankly, you can use ribbon. As they get bigger, especially if you have a lot of plants together, it can be helpful to use something like a rope or a yardstick to kind of like section off an area, monitor it, and then section off another area and kind of move through. I've even used like 2 yardsticks to kind of make myself, okay, I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to move them, and I'm going to look at this. They don't have to be yardsticks. You can just use normal sticks. Um, Whatever you need to do to kind of make it systematic, because you don't want to double count. The number of plants is important and confusingly might actually change throughout the season. Um, what is a plant is a question that you might not think that you need to ask. But it's science. We have to make rules for things. So a plant, for our purposes, is anytime a stem breaks the surface of the soil, which sounds really dumb that I'm explaining that. And it's really straightforward in like this left-hand first example, which is a really accurate depiction by me of common milkweed. But other species, like this sort of weird depiction of butterfly milkweed, will break the surface and then they can immediately branch and then form almost like a little bush, but it's all coming from one stem out of the ground. That's still one plant, which can seem weird because it's maybe providing more food from a monarch, or at least has winning more bushy. But we kind of know that. So when you submit that as one plant, but you tell us the species, our data sort of accounts for that. Other species, common milkweed will do this very occasionally, but species like swamp milkweed will do things like this example on the second slide, which oh, there's my cursor, where a plant will break the surface, but it'll actually have like 2 stems. And underground, you're telling me, Erica, that's one plant underground. I know. The data knows that. Those 2 stems breaking the ground, we count them as 2 plants, even though underground they might be one plant. That's just how we had to come up with a rule so that we knew what one plant was. Some species do this more than others. The rule of thumb is look at the surface of the ground, not the bark mulch. If you put bark mulch, like scrape it away. But if the dirt is dividing them, it's 2 plants. If they branch after they've broken the dirt, it's one plant. So examples, like here on the left, there's a ton of stems here, which may in fact all be one plant, but they're very clearly separated by dirt. So this is like, I don't know, 5 plants. Here, it's confused. It's a little weird. You'd have to scrape away the bark mulch, but at least from what I can see, it looks like these stems are separated by soil. So these are individual plants. This, come on, slide. It's hard because you can't zoom in, but if you zoom in, this appears to be branching after it's broken the soil surface, and it appears to be one plant with multiple stems. So that's kind of how we divide that. That if you did this last year, it may have been we may have explained it different, you may have done it differently. That's okay. We were kind of on the fence about this rule. Sort of nationally, all the Monarch folks have agreed, like, this is how we're going to data, so that all of our data talks really clearly to each other. This is the data sheet that we have on our site, that most of us probably printed at our office printers and brought home. If you don't have a printer, that's okay. You can make this on notebook paper. We just provide one because it's easier. So when I do this, I write big, I take up a ton of lines, I'll write the date. We ask you for the start and stop time, really so that we understand how much work we're asking people to do. Also, because if you told me that you monitored 400 plants in 5 minutes, we might come back to you and say, did you mean four instead of 400? Did you get the time wrong? It just helps to kind of have that information. So then you'll do the species name. You can totally use common names. You don't have to do the Latin, but you can do the Latin. Then you'll write the number. Oh boy, I knew that was going to happen. Okay, back. Good. So you write the name and the number of plants. The number of plants may change. It will almost certainly actually change throughout the season. The plant will make more stems, which may be separated by soil, thus you're counting them as plants. Throughout the season, it'll probably peak in the middle of the season, and then actually the monarchs will sometimes consume entire plants that will like drop off of your data, or plants will start senescing or dying back for the year, and your number will decrease. And then so as I'm monitoring, I'm making hash marks for plants. As I'm monitoring, I'm making hash marks when I see eggs or caterpillars at different stages or instars. And so I'm just sort of hashing, and then I add them up at the end and enter those total numbers. You're welcome to like take your tablet out and enter data directly into the data sheet if that's what works for you. I think a lot of people were doing sort of just hash marks. If you have 10 milkweed plants and you need a new line, go for it. If you, I will put like, common milkweed, and then if I have butterfly milkweed, I'll do that a few more lines down, and then I'll just kind of hash as I'm encountering plants as I'm moving through. Some people's plants are in different patches, and then you would use a different data sheet typically for that. So do what works for you. Again, we provide this if it helps. The back of this data sheet is all optional things. So we found personally, and then as we talk to people, as they were collecting data, as you look at these patches every day, you start to notice things. And those things could be really helpful to us. We don't want to ask you to monitor adult monarchs or like record every single plant blooming in your garden every single time, especially if you're not sure what they are, or you just don't want to give us that much time. Totally fine. If you do want to write those things down, it's helpful for us to know what's blooming around these milkweeds, because maybe that impacts how monarchs are attracted, or maybe it impacts what predators are attracted to monarch eggs. Seeing other like insects and spiders, some of whom are predators for monarch caterpillars, is really helpful to us. People submitted photos of the different predators they were seeing. That was awesome, and that's optional. It's optional in that you could also do it sometimes and not others. You could do it in the days when you have a lot of time and not do it if you don't have a lot of time. The core data we need is about those eggs and caterpillars. So then I'm going to tell you what we're going to ask you to do in July, and you have to remember all of it. No, we'll tell you again in July. But in July, we just need the dimensions of your patch of milkweed, not the whole garden that's growing within the patch of milkweed that you've been monitoring, because we need to kind of calculate that density of milkweed. So you just sort of round up whatever, is it kind of rectangular? Is it more circular? If it's a circle, just give us the distance across. If it's a rectangle, the length and width, whatever kind of works, so that we can then calculate a sense of that area, or we can make the computer do it. Somebody just said, could a patch consist of one plant? Absolutely. we're very curious about those solitary milkweed plants. Um, 5 years ago, I thought the solitary milkweed plant wouldn't, support a monarch caterpillar, and I was wrong, it will. We part of this is also, like, we're part of a national conversation about monarchs, and some people think at the, 6,000 acre prairie scale, and to them, 5 plants in someone's backyard, like, doesn't seem that significant, and it's taken really a lot of time and a lot of work on our part to say, "Well, yeah, but it's like 1,000,000 people with 5 plants," What if it's 1,000,000 people in 5 different cities with 5 plants? That's a lot of plants now. And so understanding, and I had actually even last year's training, I was like, I'm not really sure how like one plant in a pot would do. And then somebody submitted a photo of every stage, the egg, every stage of the caterpillar and the pupae, and then the monarch emerging from that pot. Like they submitted that for us. And I was like, well, I was wrong about that. Which was awesome to get that level of information.